in rechten.
bir müşteri olan
Im rechten Teil an der Nordseite.
Moving forward.
In the history of the 20th century, the car industry has been utterly central to the both to the economy and to the forms of social life that have developed. And in that century, it was presumed that that industry would continue to expand, develop, and that there would be no challenge and no reversal of those processes. There are many indicators of the decline of the car in the early years of this century. There's the spectacular collapse of some American iconic car firms that defined in a way the mobile 20th century. Certain US cities have experienced very rapid population and economic decline, and especially Detroit, in a way the world's greatest ever car city. The global supplies of oil are running down, with 1 new barrel discovered for every 4 used. The US, interestingly, has recorded the first drops in car mileage for a generation or so, while new cohorts of young Americans, or indeed young Europeans, seem to desire the latest smartphone rather than a new car. One set of writers have described a plateau occurring in the patterns of travel, and this has been described as reaching peak travel in North America and parts of Western Europe. And in a way, with the problems of oil supply and of the effects of climate change, it looks like there's a real desire to find alternative forms of fast travel. And there are a number of possibilities here. In particular, what we might come to think about is whether we could imagine a kind of post-car system coming to develop, a system of which we might think of as a sort of mixture of new technologies and new ways of organising. So we could think of personal travel involving small, ultralight, smart, probably battery-based vehicles that would be hired, a bit like the hiring of bikes now in Paris, London or Barcelona. Streets would be full of often speed-controlled microcars, minibuses, bikes, electric bikes, hybrid vehicles, possibly driverless rapid transit systems, as well as pedestrians. Ideally, these would be seamlessly integrated together with larger scale public transport systems. Smartphones, or the successors to smartphones, would control access and payment for multiple and interconnected forms of mobility. And we might imagine carbon allowances would be allocated, monitored and measured, perhaps through new apps on these smartphones or whatever replaces smartphones. This would be a sort of more controlled system, less freedom to walk, to drive, to move without traces. And as you move, traces would be left and some payment extracted. And this would also be a system, this kind of new socio-technical system, in which is a kind of greater integration of the digital and the transportational. Software would intelligently work out the best means of doing tasks, whether this meant meeting up or getting to some place or simply staying put or communicating in other kinds of ways. Some forms of meetings would be effectively simulated through virtual communications that are as good as meeting face to face. So we might imagine in this kind of future a kind of partial replacement of mobile lives with digital lives, to some degree reducing the need for travel, especially over longer distances. And we might think that there would be some kinds of technological transformations in which business, social and social life, family life, would not be face to face, but it would be thought of as good to meet virtually as it would be to meet face to face. So this kind of digital future is complicated to bring about. There are, of course, many indicators of it, such as the system of hiring electric vehicles in Paris, but and there are many other inventions, discoveries, new kinds of computer systems, apps, and so on. So we could think of it a bit like the beginning of the 20th century, when what we call the car system was being assembled. And of course it never occurred as a fully fledged system, but it was made up of many different innovations, experiments, tinkerings, and so on. So the question is, are the kinds of innovation currently occurring around the world possibly could form a whole new socio-technical system, a post-car digital system emerging out of very many elements of technologies, materials, policies, payment systems, social practices, and so on. One of the interesting features I think that such a system would need to really develop would be to shift from a system of ownership to a system of access. So what would happen would be the accessing of mobility and other services, let's call them, a little bit like the way Jeremy Rifkin has described this over a number of years. And some of the experimentations with car clubs, new car hire systems, pay-as-you-go schemes for electric vehicles, and so on, are experiments which are kind of moving along this sort of pathway. Central would be communication systems to enable the supply of interchangeable mobility systems to be accessed, paid for, but not predominantly owned. So I think some of the possibilities of a post-car system presuppose a post-ownership kind of sets of arrangements. So by the middle of this century, we might expect some, at least, features of a post-car system to have really taken off. Probably in some place that is currently not the centre of the world's car industry. And there are some of the innovations that might build into that would be electric bike innovation in China, where there are 120 million electric bikes. The system of battery replacement in Israel being pioneered by Better Place. Some of the public transport integrated systems in Brazil. The ambition of the Bay Area to become the electric vehicle capital of the United States, some of the innovations in China, and so on. So there are what some writers have called small cracks appearing in the current automobility system, and an array of niche developments occurring. And the question is, could and how might one or more of those niches become assembled together to realise an electric vehicle, new socio-technical vehicle system? There are, of course, formidable barriers and problems in the development of such a system. And in a way, what's necessary is that this socio-technical system, this new post-car system, over time would make obsolete the steel and petroleum car system that has dominated the 20th century. And it would also be very important to prevent what's often called the rebound effect. That is of simply the new system being cheaper and more fun, and so all that people did was to make more journeys or more longer journeys and so on. It also, of course, is a problem that electric vehicles presuppose electricity, and most electricity is so far generated using fossil fuels. However, electric vehicles can be at least 4 times as efficient as petrol-driven vehicles. So it is just possible but that by the end of the century, the steel and petroleum car system that we have come to know and love will be no more. If there are cars, they will be mainly housed in museums, if museums still exist, or if maybe all museums will become virtual. Cars, those 1 to 2 ton monsters powered by refined oil, built of steel, privately owned, seating at least 4 people, and with their own territory of car parks and roads, will be seen as dinosaurs, remnants of the 20th century. People will not be able to imagine how life was possible with these dinosaurs. And indeed, people may come to gawp at them, a little like 1950s American cars are now gawped at on the streets of Havana. So cars will be seen as so 20th century, and it is just possible that the car will be seen as a dinosaur from the perspective of the late 21st century.
Seite sowie den Außenbereich den rechten.